Hello, everyone, and here we are for our Pandemic is a Prism series. And normally we open with some music and poetry, but today we're going to tell a story or two. I think a story that may reveal to us some of what's to come. So there's a wise fool in the East. His name is Mullah Nasruddin. So the first story goes like this. Once Mullah Nasruddin was in his garden, and he was sprinkling breadcrumbs around his lawn. And a friend comes by and says, Nasruddin, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm sprinkling breadcrumbs around my garden. He says, well, why on earth are you doing such a thing? He says, oh, that's to keep the tigers away. He said, Nasruddin, there's no tigers from 3,000 miles from this place. He says, yeah, it's effective, isn't it? So such is the humor of Nasruddin, right? That we all have this kind of, you might say, confirmation bias of how things work, and something that we'll explore in this session. And the next one, once upon a time, Nasruddin was searching frantically in the dark, and then he moved into this place where there's some more light, right? So there he is out looking all around the floor, and a friend comes by and says, Nasruddin, what are you doing like this, searching frantically? He says, oh, I'm looking for my keys. I lost my house keys. I can't find them. And so the friend says, well, you know what? A good friend is one such as me. I'll get down on the floor with you and we'll find your key. Don't worry. So they get down and they're searching, and 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes go by. And still, there's no key to be found. And so the friend says, Nasruddin, this is a small area. We've searched it maybe 10 times. Are you sure you dropped your key here? And Nasruddin says, no, actually, I'm absolutely certain I didn't drop my key here. He says, then why on earth are we searching for your key in this place? He says, because over there it's dark. There's no way I can see. This is the only place where the light is. So I came here to look for my key. So a little bit of that the humor of Nasruddin of where it is that we're looking for truth, for information. Do we just look for where we can see the light? And what happens when the truth is in the darker places? How do we bring that light to bear? Ian, would love to hear some of your thoughts on the story a little bit before we enter and bring on our guest today.
Thank you, Zamir. Thank you for guiding us in. Yeah, the question of where we look for truth, and how do we understand truth? This idea of truing is something that's come up in our conversations already, and for those that were there with us, our journey so far. I mean, this is episode or session perhaps 7, I believe, and we've covered quite a lot of territory. And it's perhaps worth revisiting again some of the intention, though, which is to see the pandemic in this time through a prismatic lens, as in what might be illuminated in ways that we don't see, or as we turn the gem of this time and see through different angles and through different conversations, what might be illuminated. That this is really what this whole series is in service to. Sometimes that means looking in places that perhaps are not authorized in some ways. And that can bring up a lot for people. And I'll say that this conversation so far, or even this session itself, has already garnered a significant amount of critique, let's say, through certain channels. And just to say that we're observing it, we're aware of it, we're taking it in, and at the same time feel that this is an important conversation to have with one who can articulate some deep veins of a whole swath of understanding or meaning making around this time. And with that, just a quick tech check as well. Zamir, I hear a little bit of feedback, I think, on my side. I might mute you perhaps when I'm talking, and then you can unmute when you're ready to speak. Does that sound? Okay, great. Awesome. And so without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome on our next guest here on The Pandemic as a Prism. Kelly Brogan is joining with us here. She's a holistic psychiatrist, author of a few best-selling books. She completed her psychiatric training and fellowship at NYU Medical Center. And she's specialized in root cause resolution approach to psychiatric syndromes and symptoms. But perhaps more controversial, Kelly is listed as part of the Disinformation Dozen, one of the 12 influencers and organizations that are said to have spread the majority of disinformation about vaccines and COVID-19. And we'll get into like what that means to be thought of, or to have that certain degree of notoriety, and at the same time, how might we be able to examine some of these understandings and the assertions that she carries, and at the same time, how might we, again, look at them and challenge them in a way in good faith, so that we may arrive somewhere that allows us to have a more true picture of what's going on. I mean, I'm very interested in this conversation, so I'm delighted to welcome Kelly onto the show with us.
It's an honor. Thank you.
So just one more thing too about the audience who's joining us right now, and certainly those who won't have this option later, but if you're open to leaving your comments and questions in the chat, we'll see them and we'll do our best to try to weave them into the conversation flow as we have here. So again, feel free to leave your comments and things there. But Kelly, so I would love to begin by actually asking you first, the whole name, the frame of the pandemic as a prism. When you heard that, what came up for you, just as an initial way into this conversation?
I love it because the light refracts through the consciousness that you bring to bear in the current situation. And as somebody who has in one lifetime inhabited many different incarnations, seemingly, such extreme, and you could, say that I'm still pendulating, right? And one day I'll arrive at the enlightened middle path. I'm not sure, but certainly I've worn the shoes of, the orthodox perspective, let's say, and now have taken on not now, but about 12 years ago, took on quite an antithetical one. And so I know what it is to feel your own same selfness, right? I'm the same woman. I'm the same person that I was. Well, I'm the same person I was when I was 2. And I'm certainly the same person I was, 15 years ago, but something has changed. The prism through which I look has shifted and changed. And now, of course, I love the stories that are so emblematic of this, right? Of course, my lived experience is nothing but a confirmation bias. It's nothing but a reflection, likely, of, not only what I already believe, but depending on my approach to adversity, perhaps it's also a reflection of that which I cannot otherwise see, and that's my particular, I guess, bent on it.
Well, can you share just a little then too, a snapshot or a moment of that transition from, like you said, orthodoxy to, I can't remember the word you just used, but like non-orthodox.
Yeah,
because I think it's also important, again, that maybe listeners have a sense of that decoupling and how it went for you and why.
So I'm second generation. My mom is Italian, and I was raised, like so many second generation kids, to really orient towards authority in a particular way. And so I basically was given the option, I could become a doctor or a lawyer or a businesswoman. And I went into great debt. My whole family did, to send me to college and the whole thing. And when I decided to volunteer at a suicide hotline at MIT, completed suicide actually was, and probably still is, quite an issue. And I volunteered at this hotline, and I was mentored by a psychiatrist, and I felt a kind of empowerment that I hadn't yet experienced in my, young life. And it was really characterized by a relief from the discomfort of human suffering, right? And I now can look back and think about how truly uncomfortable I was with others' discomfort. Right? I could not tolerate it. So when I was handed this toolkit that was essentially, here's what you do when someone else's distress is so immense that no one can handle it, right? Like the active moment of suicide is about as intense as it gets, to confront your helplessness as another human in front of a human on this planet, right? So I was given this toolkit. All you have to do is get them into the care of a psychiatrist and hopefully facilitate their swift medication, right? And so I went to medical school, riding that carpet of empowerment. And as I think most reformed doctors, if I can say that, would agree, that the whole paradigm channels through a good heart, right? I wanted to and thought that I was helping the women that I was working with. I specialized in, and I was actually one of the first 300 in the world to specialize in what is euphemistically dubbed perinatal psychiatry, but actually refers to the medicating of pregnant and breastfeeding women. So that was my specialty. That was my population. I was, facilitating the medicating of these women with all manner of psychotropics, and had, my scientifically based perspectives on why that was valid, justifiable, and, it would be reckless to do anything other than that. And I thought that I was doing good, right? So it wasn't until I had my own lived experience of the gross limitations of this model that I shifted. And that shift, what is obviously characterized as cognitive dissonance, sometimes in the psychology world is called a rupture of empathy. This experience of like, wait a minute, the system that I invested blood, sweat, and tears, $200,000 of debt. I don't know why I'm focused on how much debt I went into, but it's true. This system that I pledged my allegiance to truly blindly, of course, there's no incentivization to question anything that we're learning. You don't have the time or wherewithal or resources. It's not a thing. So I invested so much of my allegiance to this authority, and now it has failed me because I am diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I have a little baby at home, and I'm trying to keep my practice afloat, and this system has nothing for me, right? It does not have a cure. It does not have a way out. And I had so many patients at that time, because it's quite a common diagnosis, who were, long-term medicated for Hashimoto's, and I knew that they never felt well. So I wanted this escape hatch. And of course, as the universe would have it, I was given a book called Anatomy of an Epidemic by a colleague who was curious about what I thought, about this book that was very condemning of the chronic use of psychotropics. And because of this rupture I was in, I actually read it. And I never started a patient on medication again. That was in 2010. And we'll talk about this probably, but I look through the lens of maturational psychology to understand the ways that we, through our trauma-based experiences, can fall on different sides of a dialectic. And so what I did was I hopped from, the childlike allegiance of the good object relationship to the medical system right over the fence to the defiant, you could call it an adolescent comportment to the bad object of that same authority. And I was enraged. I mean, I took my sword out of its sheath and I was like running naked on the battlefield. And that energy of betrayal, and I've heard it said that betrayal is simply seeing something you were unwilling to see previously. That energy of betrayal. I wrote my first book with hundreds of references and wrote hundreds of blogs. And, I felt like the onus was upon me to take down this system, and I was here and ready to do it. And then, of course, I went through a couple of dark nights and refined my sensibilities a bit. And I'm still in that, process of stepping into sovereignty, hopefully.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Sure.
Kelly, it is really always great to hear someone's personal story. I think it lends so much more weight to, as you said, to what shaped their view, what shaped their perception, right? And clearly, it seemed to me that you almost underwent your own kind of traumatic experience with this medical system, right? And that sort of shaped your view. And you actually opened with quite a bit of humility when you spoke to the story about Mullah Nasruddin and sort of him sprinkling the breadcrumbs and that sort of confirmation bias and the recognition that your way of seeing the world is a reflection of the bias or what you carry within you. And so events that are occurring outside of are going to mirror back to you what you already have come to understand, assumptions that you carry. But it seems to me that you said that you're in this truing process, that you're sort of aware of it, maybe being a psychologist, even more hyper aware of how the mind does these sort of cognitive tricks, right? So in the process of, because a lot of criticism has been levied from you, towards you from many different angles. And I would imagine that there's times where you're also noticing where what you consider to be true at one point is different from what you see now, and acknowledging where those biases are. I'm curious to know if you'd be willing to share, in the last year or 2 years, how have you noticed yourself, or what areas have you noticed where your biases are present, and how have you started to shift your views on subjects that you had carried strongly in the past?
Yes, thank you for that question. So it's interesting. I, for whatever reason, am temperamentally constructed to really not care what the public thinks of me. So, when you say the criticism, I mean, I'm not fully abreast of it, I'm sure. And it really doesn't interest me. And, in my intimate life, my husband can look at me wrong at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday and I'll be recovering still, 3 weeks later. So, it's just, it's my relationship to whatever is this anonymous virtual public that is not super compelling to me on an emotional trauma-based level. However, I will say that in 2016, there was quite a significant wave of attention that came my way, and including, aerial shots of my home with death threats and all the rest of it, actually in response to a home birth article that I had written, believe it or not, or maybe it is believable to your audience, I'm not sure. But nonetheless, I was dubbed an ableist. I said, what does that word mean? I never heard that before. And when I kind of researched it, of course, it was used as a slur. But when I researched it, I thought, you know what? There is always truth. There's always at least a little nugget of truth in criticism. And I found actually a large rock, maybe a boulder in that one, because I had dedicated my practice at that point to helping women come off of these medications and move through their maturational process and embrace, that disavowed part of themselves that was condemned through diagnosis, et cetera. And, I came to believe that anyone who has the will, commitment, and discipline, who makes the choice, can heal from anything. And then, of course, I attracted a mentor, as we're saying, right? So I was starting to live in that world, and I attracted a mentor who then provided me with hundreds of documented cases of just that, stage 4 terminal cancer, pancreatic cancer, or 34-year survival. It's never been reported before, right? Well, here it is, right? And once there's an exception to the rule should be examined. So I already was living in this celebrating what is possible place because of his death, actually, and the dark night that I went through subsequently. I'd really started to move away from, that kind of vigilante activism. And I really, I think on a soul level felt self-conscious in the way that Nietzsche has referred to, you can become the monster you're fighting. I started to see that happening in ways, and certainly seeing it happening in the colleagues around me. So when this started, the first, I had been in the activism world for 10 years around specific issues related to infectious disease, related to vaccination, related to the ways in which the system is set up to create crises and then assert socio-political control through, the dialectic that emerges from and through the crisis, right? So I already was in that world. So when this befell us, I saw it in the way that I will see it immediately, right? And that's what put me perhaps on some map, because despite my team's guidance, I had to open my mouth, and I put out a little video that got picked up, and about what causes illness, right? And do we really know? And let's hold on a minute here, kind of a thing. And as much as I got sucked into the what's going on, what's the truth, like research tunnel, for many months, I was, I think, relatively quickly called back to the carpet of the psychospiritual work that I am very committed to, shadow work that I'm committed to. And I went looking for the ways in which in my own life, I am holding the energy of a hierarchical totalitarian, right?
Okay.
So that which I would very readily condemn, finger point, and blame as being, again, that parentified authority, right? And rallying my friends and colleagues to say, can you believe what they're doing, right? This kind of indignant energy of the adolescent, right? And of course, there's so much victim energy, and I've really come to believe that victim consciousness is the only human pathology, and it is the root of what I would refer to as a lot of evil that can come through otherwise very good people. That victim consciousness, which I believe itself is the great illusion, right? It's what obscures our ability to see our God creative power and our innate, deep, sacred wisdom.
Well, let me jump in there too. Zamir,
Yeah.
I got a couple of threads too. I'd love to. Yeah. Thanks, Kelly.
Oh, so you don't want to hear yet about how I was a totalitarian? I'm happy not to talk about that.
Well, I don't want to skip over a couple of key kind of elements that I think would help the groundwork, because you've mentioned you seeing through the lens of the maturation process as well, and you use words like, I think, like sovereignty, and so this to me are like, this is kind of key areas that we need to sort of name first before getting too far in, because so you've posited that, my understanding from your work and also some of the conversation here, that my sense is that essentially that there's this whole externalized structure of authority, and I mean represented by the medical system, by government, and other realms that essentially take people's power away, or at least create the sense that safety is provided by these structures, safety is provided by these authorities.
I wouldn't say they take power away. That's an important
sorry, but I mean like by take, or it's given, let's say, right, by the populace, let's say. So I that's my reading of your work in a sense of, and so what you're advocating for in this case, where one's own medical or health is also sort of outsourced. Outsourced is another word you've used, is that you're asking them to say, look, no, you have to take that back. You have to take over your own truth around your own health and your own,
if you want to.
If you want to. So there's the advocacy there. And so you relate that though to also the missing rites of passage, initiatory journeys or initiatory cultures, which I think would craft that journey into maturation, right? That sense of at least sovereignty. This is my, again, just flyby. And so I'm curious to know, so what do you mean when you say sovereignty in that context, right? Because that feels like an important station before we sort of get too far, much further.
Right. Yes. Thank you for this clarification opportunity. So the idea of the initiation would be to visit with death, right? That's a characteristic of whether it's, childbirth or a vision quest, to visit with death and to move through the mind-based egoic perception that you cannot, right? I can't do this, into a space of expanded selfhood, right? Because we don't have that, certainly in America, any relationship to that. We're coddled through to our elder years, because that dependency, I believe that dependency serves a hierarchical system. Because we don't have that, we are living in our defensive structure that served us as children, and we never refine it, reform it, or shed it, right? To understand that actually we don't need to recruit that any longer because the boogeyman is not here, right? So sometimes I use an analogy, right, of this like 40-year-old woman who's in her parents' basement, right? And her parents have beat her, abused her, starved her. She's been totally isolated, right? She's grown up now, though, and she can actually reach the window. And, she might decide, oh, well, they've done the best they can and I'm taken care of here and it's okay, or she might decide, you know what, I'm going to crawl out that damn window next Tuesday. And I don't care that I don't, even speak English normally or well, and I don't have clothes and I don't have a job and I don't know where to go. I'm going to do it anyway, right? That existential death experience that she would have to traverse to move through that window would, of course, we can feel it in our bodies, right? Like initiate her to her true power. And so that flip-flopping I referred to, the compliant versus defiant, those are two aspects of the, the object relationship that is characteristic of the child. And when we are not initiated into adult psychology, we cannot hold the mixed object of truly seeing, right? You're a little bit of bad and a little bit of good, or a lot of good, little bad, a lot of bad, little good. And you are all of it. We all are all of it. When we're trained in the child psychology, we relate to ourselves that way too. So when I'm in my righteous, victim consciousness, I feel correct. Even if I'm right about being wronged, I feel empowered by my rightness over you. And hidden from my awareness are all of the dimensions of myself that actually you represent, or you wouldn't bug me, right? You are holding for me my own bad object because it feels safer to relate, in this way to you than it does to look at, oh, that's in me too. That's awkward, and to see how it is that I can integrate those parts of me and then relate to you as your own individual, your own good and bad object. So the sovereign path, the adult path, to me, those are somewhat interchangeable terms. It's characterized non-oppositionally, right? It's actually non-referential, because who you are, your deep okayness, that contact with witness consciousness is ever present and irrepressible, actually. And nothing needs to change on the outside, right? So when I have, in these past 2 years, when I have examined this in myself, many instances in my own lived life, whether it was how I was running my business, whether some like little parenting, issues like telling my girls to clean their rooms or whatever. And specifically the way that I engage many aspects of secular living, whether it was having a smartphone or ordering from Amazon or shopping at Whole Foods, that were incoherent with who it was that I, in my self-concept, wanted to experience, myself as. And so that process of stepping into greater and greater sovereignty has made it less relevant, kind of what's going on over there, and far more relevant how it is that I feel incoherence with, what it is that I'm claiming, what it is that I'm stating my beliefs are, and how it is that I am behaving, such that the charge, right? So that big bad mommy daddy, right, figure shrinks down into something very human size and impersonal, actually. And I can focus my energy on what it is to declare I am, to the world, without actually needing anyone to change because of it. And I've referred to the kind of comportment that helps remind me of what that would feel like as a strong spine, right? This is me as an individual, right? Cells have cell walls. It's important that I understand my unique perspective, right? And I actually voice it. And strong spine and a soft heart, right? So my front is open.
Does Zamir get stirred too? I mean, I'd love to just follow that too, to say, so it seems to be that if one's able to step into their sovereignty, right, as you've defined it, see, my understanding of indigenous rites of passage, for example, is that they're then welcomed into a deep consequence to their tribal life, right? And so in that sense, I'm curious where that is, how that intersects, right? Because what I've read a lot in the critiques around things like, my body, my choice, like this whole idea of reclaiming one's own sovereignty, is that it seems to butt up against this idea of being consequential to other people, right? And so I feel like there's some kind of, I can't sort that out, like, because if we all have our individual truths, right, which we arrive at through a process of maturation and are able to say, like, I'm unique, this is my perspective, this is my health journey, how does that actually intersect with everyone else who's also, let's say, finding their own sovereign truth? But it seems to not incorporate this idea, again, that we are deeply relational and consequential to each other, particularly when it comes to things like mask wearing or others, right? As in, the story goes that that's creating harm by us not willing to proceed with the degree of village mindedness. I'm using now the language that often would get leveled at those that right, say, well, that your individuality, that doesn't matter in the face of actually like our shared reality. And so I'm just curious, how do those two fit together in your take on things?
Yeah, I love this question. I love this conversation. This is so refreshing for me. And I think that's not a question I can answer, to be honest. And I'll take a stab at it, which is that I'm not sure as a collective that we are ready for that kind of communitarian consciousness, right? I'm just not sure. It's a beautiful idea. And at the heart of even things like communism, right, and Marxism it is an impulse of service to others and altruism and this, philanthropic connection that keeps us all in a space of love that would not be available if we were, of course, in our silos, let alone survival. That would not be available otherwise. My sense is that, we are in an organizational stage, and that it's essential for us to understand ourselves very deeply. That's actually the invitation first. And again, like I've used this analogy of, it's like as if we're a smattering of different kinds of human cells, like biological cells. And, the liver cells got to get with the liver cells, and the eyeball cells got to get with those. And only through this actual segregation and distinction and understanding of individuality can we properly serve the holobiont. Can we properly come together in a harmony? And it strikes me that the deep self-exploration that is necessary to understand our deep selves, make contact with our souls, is quite different from the intellectual understanding that is enculturated through our school system or whatever other intellectual apparatus we try on as we're maturing, right? So this my worldview brings us to a place of personal responsibility. And that is a chief concept in this rubric, that I'm putting forth, because personal responsibility is something that is not invoked in that more collectivism consciousness, right? You are responsible actually for others, and you have a service to take their interests as your own, right? That's a duty you have as a human, right? The personal responsibility phase, again, maybe this is maturational on the collective level, I don't know, but it's different, right? It says, actually, when I serve first myself, when I take care of myself as a budding adult, then there is a meta harmony that can come from that and through that will emerge. And I don't have to force that or direct that it's an emergent consequence of personal responsibility. And I found that in my, women's work, both personally and professionally. I have, 2 daughters and 2 stepdaughters, and I teach my daughters, never to do anything with their bodies to make someone else comfortable that makes them uncomfortable. Literally, ever. If they're sitting on a bus and a cute old lady comes on and she wants their seat, but she's exhausted because she just, ran a mile or whatever, do not get up. That's my worldview, is actually only when we pledge allegiance to serving our own needs do we stop manipulating others to meet our needs, because we will meet them either way. We will meet them through service when we get to feel like a good and virtuous person that's still meeting our own needs. So maybe I don't believe in selflessness, or maybe I'm not personally evolved to the extent that I can experience that. But I do have a skeptic's sort of mind about this, because I'm not sure I know anybody who can subvert their own needs in service of another's.
Let's say, for example, as a mother, your child wants your breast milk, and you're just feeling like, your child's crying for breast milk. And you're like, what, I'm just feeling tired right now. I got work to do. Let it cry. Okay. I'm not going to feed it my breast milk. Okay. Because it just doesn't feel right to me. It's not overflowing. You kind of use this word of, it's not overflowing from your cup, right? This sort of notion that I don't need to really sacrifice it. Does that sit right for you as well?
That's not my business, honestly.
I'm asking you personally. Yeah.
So me personally,
for your worldview, do you feel that there is a line whereby you're overcoming your personal discomfort or the meeting of your own need in service to something that is really not just about you, but the meeting the need of another. And I know, and this is something that I wanted to bring up in general, which is that, you know, what I noticed from your work, Kelly, is that you have, when you talk, when I'm listening to you, you have some really excellent insights, psychological insights, personal insights, and I can see why there's this sense where people resonate with certain parts of what you're saying, right? And as someone who's also been practicing as a holistic counselor, I studied with Gabor Mate for a number of years. I really have taken on this sort of trauma-informed lens. That there's something called conflation. And that's when you have one idea that works well in this particular context, okay? And you try to apply it into an area where it actually doesn't blend with another concept, right? And I think where people fall out with your work is that there's a lot of conflation that happens. That something that may be true in this context, we apply it to be true in a context where it's no longer relevant. I mean, people say that, for example, in germ theory, for example. I mean, you have this line, you know, it's spreading and causing disease, which allows us as a collective to remain in the child psychology of fighting a bad enemy we seek to one day beat with the help of the parents we always hope would protect us. Now, if you're looking at it from a psychological perspective of individuation, that makes sense, but applying it across the board necessarily to, you know, not entertaining a theory of germs because it plays into a debilitating or you might say a disempowering psychological dynamic, that's called conflation, right? And this is where we get into dangerous territory because people who are not schooled more deeply in these areas can easily fall into conflation, right? So, I mean, have you noticed conflation in the work that you do? Have you teased it out? I mean, where do you sit with this?
So you asked me two questions. So I'll start with the first, because I think that was an important analogy. And you clarified, you know, what if it was me, right? So again, if it's me, then I am interested in stepping out of the good girl, bad girl dichotomy, right? So if I am going to breastfeed my daughter, even though I do not want to, and I feel that it harms me to do so in that moment, if I'm going to do it, then I'm adopting the good girl virtue despite myself. I would argue that energetically and in other ways, I am actually also doing her a disservice. Certainly, if I do not take that opportunity to more deeply connect to the why and align with a desire to do that, or own the fact that this is not working for me. That like removes the charge, and my daughter no longer becomes like this transitional object between me and that parentified projection of judgment about whether I'm doing a good thing or a bad thing. Because, you know, that's where addiction can be perpetuated also, is like this, you know, I deserve this kind of like naughty engagement of the bad thing. It has so much life force. And I think this is an opportunity for me to get clear. There is a deep feminine impulse, maybe one of the most sacred that is available, that we have not been enculturated to embrace. I'll speak for my experience of womanhood. I was certainly not enculturated to embrace. Breastfeeding was handed down to me even through the holistic community, the healthy, right thing to do. Well, you know what? I cheated myself of a much deeper connection to the why that would have served both me and my daughter in that moment. That being a concept that we strive for relieves us of the sort of the good bad assessment, that dualism that we can bring to our own behavior. And I think that actually distorts everything that we do. So that's that. The conflation piece, I'm not sure I'm a great example actually of that particular fallacy, logical fallacy. Because I do have the scientific training, research, and background to bring dimensions of coherence. I'm into congruency and coherence, right? To that assertion that I otherwise write about in the more mythopoetic approach and realm, right? Like if we want to talk about, I've just published a 52-page, highly referenced ebook on the similarities scientifically between HIV and SARS-CoV-2, right? If we want to talk about, cytopathic effects of looking at cell culture and applying that through the lens of Koch's postulates, like we can get down like that too. Because of the nature of scientism as a religious belief system, and the divorce of science from its own accountability, right? So science is meant to scientists and researchers are meant to disprove themselves the moment they prove something, right? To find all of the reasons and ways that what it is that they're putting forth may be attributable to something other than what they're assuming that it is. And my colleagues, Dr. Tom Cowan and Dr. Andy Kaufman, have devoted the past year and a half to exposing this on a deeply scientific level. That is not going on any longer. But we still have the hierarchy that says, I'm a doctor, researcher, she's a surgeon, he's a scientific expert. You don't know. You can't know. You're not an expert, right? So we're in this awkward moment of still outsourcing to authorities, which through that lens, I am one still, right? Through that credentialed lens, while also feeling entitled to our own perspective. Like I was joking with my ex-husband, I was like, everyone's a microbiologist now. I was like, you know what? I studied many years of microbiology, and actually now I'm in the process of unlearning most of it. But nonetheless, the conflation, I absolutely could see that if I hadn't invested the time, interest, research, and also done a lot of this bench research myself in my history, that it could just be sort of like hand-waving poetics. And, that could still be asserted, but I'm not sure I'm the best example, because I can approach like how much sense it makes on all of these levels, right? Like, that actually a virus has never been isolated and purified. And we could debate. That's why the debate thing is like, yes, we could play the scientism, like confirmation bias game, and that's fine. But I prefer the Socratic method, right? Like,
I love the Socratic method. I think the Socratic method is absolutely essential. But where one of the challenges I find, Kelly, is that, in the past, there is a foundation, an intellectual foundation in Western culture that really originated from this practice of the Socratic method, of really deeply inquiring into the truth, something that has been lost from this generation. I mean, people are not being trained to develop their minds in a way where they can really deeply inquire and challenge and question. Totally. And I feel like in one level, you're doing that in your own way, saying like, okay, hold on, people, like, let's really ask these questions, right? And you're taking it through a Socratic method. But at the same time, that same ability can be applied to your work. And
absolutely. And it should.
And I think that it should be, and people are doing that, right? Yeah. And so that was where, in my own, what sort of my initial question to you, and something that you said in your second response indicated to me your own sort of process, which was, at first, the sort of big government, mummy, daddy, big government, big pharma was this sort of looming presence. But as you claim more and more of your own sovereignty, the more it became something small and manageable, which existed, but it didn't have to dominate your sort of a fear response or a denial response, or, you might say adolescent response. Right? So, I mean, isn't it interesting that these sort of looming forces, right, all of a sudden begin to change as we claim more and more of our own intellectual, our own spiritual sovereignty, where we're no longer a victim of those forces. But when I encounter some of the work that you've written, it seems as if those forces are still looming really large. They haven't still come into this small, manageable place where it seems to me that you arrived at in your work.
I haven't arrived. I'm sorry if I gave that indication.
Okay.
No. I mean, I'm doing that work. And, at this point, things like I got off my smartphone in December, like I still am not off Amazon, I'm trying to grow my own food. And it's such a humbling process to be at the bottom of a totem pole after having ascended into expert mastery, or whatever of these conceptual, really the conceptual divergence from my training. So I am in no way arrived. I would never call myself a sovereign individual. In fact, I'm just finishing a course on emancipating myself from the legal system through the reclamation of law common to every man and woman, so I'm a novice at this. However, what delights me, actually, to be honest, at this point, is to have that little experience of like, oh my gosh, that's not true either. It doesn't feel like it used to feel, which is like, what? Like this, like punch in the chest. Like I mentioned, my colleague, Tom Cowan, I just watched a lecture that he did on intracellular organelles, and really breaking down and dragging into the room, this possibility that it's all artifact. And, that could be conjecture, but for me, it's interesting. It turns me on, it lights me up to question. That is not everyone's bag, and if it's not, I have again, the part that maybe I have some degree of claim on is that for me, it is necessary that everybody do them, right? You do you walk your path and journey. I used to feel, particularly about the subject of vaccination, that I felt, because of the impact on children, and as a mother, I felt a responsibility to influence other mothers, right? And I've published in the peer-reviewed literature about the psychobiology of vaccination, and this has been interesting to me on a scientific level for a long time. I've put probably more than 10,000 hours of research into the subject. Again, having been a huge believer in the model, I was super excited when the HPV vaccine came out. I thought it was like a feminist victory, in medical school. And I felt the anonymous victim, right, was mine to care for. And again, through the psychological lens, that's often referred to as the drama triangle, right? The victim triangle, where you have, the persecutor, you have the victim, and then you have the rescuer. So if you ever find yourself, as of course I have made a career out of it, if you ever find yourself in that role of feeling like, wow, only I can help this person in this special way, odds are you could flop, to any of those corners of the triangle. Is it called angles of the triangle? With any different passing hour, right? That it's used the nature of it, because it's the victim consciousness that's at the core, right? The rescuer, is feeling the persecutor's energy. The victim is feeling the persecutor's energy, and the persecutor's only persecuting because they're being victimized by the victim. It's like this triangular circle of hell. And that has been resolving for me personally, because of the childhood trauma work, the Gabor Mate kind of work that I've been doing in my own personal life. I have found that actually it's not for me to decide whether or not it's best for a child to be, vaccinated by their potentially unknowing, from my perspective, uninformed parents. It felt like something that ripped my heart out of my chest for many years of my work. And now I can really inhabit a place that is not apathetic, because that can be another flavor of the same sensitivity, right? That really says, I don't know what that individual's journey consists of and what they need, because I have confronted so many moments in my own life of the awe that I feel at how different my perspective was. I mean, we're talking about health and medicine. I could give you 10 other examples of how I have changed my mind, right? And evolved my perspective on something. It is so humbling, and it's very, it's tender, and it's so like those moments that you want to slow down so you could see how they're made. It's not something you can prescribe or coerce. That's why I no longer believe, despite, I do science for sport. I've published all these case reports and case studies. I've done an IRB randomized controlled trial. I do it for sport, for fun, but I don't have any illusion that anyone is changing their mind because of scientific information. And that's why I've become interested in the nature of readiness for change, because you're not ready even the millisecond before you're ready. If somebody comes to you and implies that you should do something differently, well, that could change your whole trajectory, right? But in 1 millisecond, perhaps you would have been ripe. And that is what compels my interest, because I feel that ripening within me in so many different dimensions. And I imagine it's going to be a lifelong process.
Thank you, Kelly. One thing that came up as you were speaking, something that Pat McCabe, who's one of our former guests on the series, said something like, anything won through domination has to be redone. Something like that. And I hear that a little bit, and I think in what you're saying, that the sense that trusting an authority that says this is the way it is, you must do this, this will keep you safe, or all these things, even if it's come through domination or even self-domination, right? Like, okay, I must. That it's not really a win in that sense.
Yes.
Or maybe winning and losing maybe is not the right language, but it's not really true, right? Because it's actually coming from a place that, like, you talked about the example of the breastfeeding. You weren't saying don't do it if you don't feel like it. You're more like, can you connect to the deep yes of the why of that, and that's actually in alignment. So that's the nuance like I'm getting from this. And I feel like we've been also circling like a larger mythic substructure, of which I just wanted to name, I think, at this point in the conversation too, because in some ways it does inform the everything upstream of that, right? That at least from my take on observing your work and the conversations, this piece to me feels like the most distilled, and I could be wrong or not, but I thought I'd just read this whole paragraph and then we'll see where we go from there. It may be a distraction to imagine that this is a war between free civilians and government, natural medicine and allopathy, liberals and conservatives. What I've come to conclude is that this is a war between the energy of sovereign human vitalism and dehumanizing parasitism. Yes, it's the power of the embodied human against these forces that feed off of human emotion, chiefly fear, to enslave and control humanity as a perpetual source of vital force energy. So,
Who said that?
my sense of it, again, you may not remember, I think it was from the ebook. But my sense, the image I got, actually, if we're talking about mythic substructure, is actually from The Matrix, right? Like the actual film where Neo's in the pod and there's the whole robots that have constructed this battery system, right, to essentially suck the life force energy of humans. And it's not lost on me, actually, that film itself, right, came out at a time, it was 1999. It even said that 99 was sort of the last great year of humans before everything went downhill and the robot invasion and all that. But there's something that it touches on there, which, again, other realms of either thought or spiritual practice or whatever, also, touch upon this sense that civilization, maybe this is the way I would say it, is that civilization itself is built upon a domination paradigm bent on exerting ever more control. And in some sense, to exchange what? And this is something that I think that you've been speaking to here, essentially, is to consume vitality, from a mythic place. And so this to me is an important substructure, because I feel like it explains in some ways all of the kind of surface arguments that happen, right? With this, like, certain mandates or this or that, or trust government or not trust government. It's like but there's a substructure here, which again, I'm not saying therefore it's right or not, but I feel like it's important to surface. Then we know, right, from a mythic perspective. And so I wonder now, hearing it now in the context of this conversation in this moment, what comes to you in terms of, how that animates you and your mission?
Yeah. So, I certainly, I don't think it would serve necessarily the conversation to go down some occultist rabbit hole of perspective on who it is that these controllers might be and why they might be doing what they're doing, or is it just government and a bunch of well-intended employees who are enacting this like evil plan, or what the hell is going on, right?
Could it be both, Kelly? Could both levels exist simultaneously? I guess that's. Anyways, I'll let you answer the question,
okay.
But I follow up on it.
Yeah. Okay. Because I think we could, what I was going to say is that we could stay in the maturational psychology realm if you know the concept of a narcissistic extension. And I haven't fleshed this out necessarily, but just to sort of illustrate another perspective of the energetics of the dynamic, which I think is what interests you, why you read the paragraph. A narcissistic extension is a child who has not emancipated emotionally, psycho-emotionally from their parent sufficiently, that they are still supplying their parent with a sense of their own selfhood and, of course, the positive self-concept, right? So that's, like, again, very common with immigrant children. I don't know, maybe it's not more common than others, I'm not sure, but it seems, that it was very important for, my parents to see, my mom to see why she came from Italy, right? So you better make it worth it, kind of a thing. And you better get your 4.0. And, she's a huge hearted, loving, beautiful woman. And, this still was an energetic parasitism, right? So I'm very interested in that concept because, and portraying it in this way, because it's not necessarily born of inanimate, robotic, D or transhumanistic entities, right? It can happen just here in our little human bodies, where we are feeding our supply off of another. And again, what would it be to either move beyond that, or I think what has been interesting to me since the beginning of this is to kind of find that as of yet unenvisioned possibility for complementarity. And from my, again, like medical health, sort of that lens, biology lens, I've been very interested in this, and I'm more interested in it interpersonally, right? Psychodynamically, relationally, because, I often tell a story about how at the beginning of this, when Miami, where I live, was in lockdown, including the beaches and everything, we were invited to dinner with some friends, and, they told us that they were social distancing, just kind of casually, like, oh, by the way, we're social distancing. So like, we just won't hug you hello. And, we're just going to set the table that way, just like FYI, whatever. And I think, previous to everything that's gone down in the past, 2 years, that kind of caution has been rewarded socially. I think pretty much exclusively. Maybe you can think of examples to the contrary. And somehow in this emergent dialectic, it was a bit more complicated, right? Because now, me being who I am, I don't wear a mask, and I certainly don't social distance, and I never did, right? Never. So that was not an option for me. And it also was of consequence to me to interact with human beings that I care about in this, from my perspective, dehumanizing manner, even if it's how they wanted it to be and how it serves them to behave. It actually hurts me. It hurts my heart to have that kind of experience with them.
Well,
do we resolve this? That the first time this happened, I was like, they don't want to be in a room with my body, and the way they want to be in the room with my body, I don't want to be in a room with them. So like, it seems totally, like, objectively irreconcilable. Well, obviously we did not incarnate. Maybe it's not obvious. It seems to me to just like go off into our segregated silos and have a nice life, pretending we didn't just lose, a human existential limb, and unravel this thread we came here to loom. So there must be another way. And that's when I became very interested in complementarity and specifically polarity, and even erotic polarity work. It's what I've spent most of the past 2 years working on in my personal life, is to understand how these literally different, to the extent of, impossibly divergent realities can come into complementarity. It is not even a matter of serving similar domains in, a sort of you're better than I am, inferior, superior. They're totally segregated, like a yin yang, right? And yet it is really just like a yin yang. There is that sort of connector of, the other within, and yet the white is segregated from, the black, and so the woman and the man, all these dialectic, examples. Like, what does that look like? I certainly have no idea, but I'm not sure there's anything more exciting to me than
I think that's super exciting, Kelly. I think that's where things get really interesting. In Chinese medicine theory, even yin yang, it's not like they're not equal in the sense that,
yes,
you could have a small amount of yin and a larger amount of yang, and a larger amount of yang and less amount of yin, and it's moving within a spectrum, right? So you're sort of breaking down this this kind of polarization, right? And we're looking at a spectrum within it. And this sort of challenges where, we claim a truth, right? And why we have to be willing to negotiate within this. And I think that's where maturity really lies. I think that's what growing up is really about, actually. It's arriving at a place of being non-biased. And because you're not coming in with a bias saying that, okay, well, if, for example, government means control, and anytime the government puts something out, it means that they're trying to control us because this is part of a larger, coordinated dynamic to draw energy from people. If you already have an existing bias around that, it's very difficult to actually enter into a place of complementarity. And so I feel like it's necessary to sort of let go. And it's difficult to do that because, as you said, our experiences inform our sense of meaning. And we form meaning from experience. And because of that, we interpret events conceptually, right? Rather than letting go of that and really meeting the moment for what it is, right? And that's what, for me, the spiritual discipline largely is the capacity to do that. And that's freedom of mind. Now your mind is actually liberated. And then the government doesn't play as big a role in your life because you're approaching it from a truly emancipated perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I feel that compassion naturally flows from that place. Wisdom naturally flows from that place.
Mm-hmm.
And to bring it onto a practical level, to explore how you might entertain this complementarity, what if we recognize that you talk about germ theory and you're probably far more knowledgeable about it than me, okay? And when I did one of my yoga trainings, we actually had to read a book. Our teacher challenged germ theory, and it was about Pasteur and Béchamp. And we had to study about their history.
And yoga training, that's amazing.
Who won out at the end. And so I was very interested in this as well. And I feel like, for example, people who have certain comorbidities that they're calling comorbidities indicates that they're more vulnerable to take on a virus, right? Because of pre-existing conditions. So we recognize that, okay, well, if I'm with people who are additionally more vulnerable and I might potentially pose a threat to them, how should I adjust my behavior if I know that they carry a vulnerability, right? How would you look at something like that? If it's, even though one recognizes, okay, well, my personal sovereignty and my personal beliefs and the way in which I treat my mind and body make me far less compromised and then somebody who doesn't carry this belief system and maybe already because of stress and because of lifestyle and because of diet makes them far more prone to be able to be vulnerable to some kind of infection. How do you relate to something like that?
So it's a straw man. That's how. Because if you do not ask deeply enough, you get lost in these weeds that you're referring to, which through my study of what is going on is actually a very integral part of this psychological operation, that human compassion is leveraged and the abdication of personal responsibility for one's health. Again, I had a decade-long practice that evidence that when you take that responsibility, you can heal anything. So no one is helpless here. Remember, I'm an ableist. But none of what you just asked me is, to my mind, worth wasting the emotional energy, investing emotional energy in, because it's a distraction. You have to go deeper in consenting to what it is we're talking about. And I don't consent to that model of reality because I have, through my research, come to question whether or not viruses exist. I have come to question whether or not contagion is even an evidenced phenomenon. I have come to question the nature of human health and disease, and I do not agree with any aspect of how you represented in this query, how you represented. So you're assuming that I am already living in your reality and that we should debate about my behavior, right? What is good, virtuous behavior? How do I take care of you as a human being? But my reality has not been allowed in the room yet. And until it is, then we cannot have that conversation.
But then what is complementarity then, in the sense that...
you see why this is so compelling to me.
Exactly, because we need to.
I
We
don't
need
know,
to
and you don't know, and nobody knows yet. Nobody has demonstrated to me how to bridge this, right? Because the assumptions are all predicated on the fact that we have an understanding of human health and biology that is sacrosanct. Well, that's hardly the case. I could show you a couple hundred colleagues, pedigreed colleagues who have come to completely dismiss every aspect of what it is, that you represented in that very simple, like well-intentioned example of how I might care for a more vulnerable person. Now, how I might, with my emotional resources, offer compassion to someone I experience as more vulnerable. That, to me, in my worldview, comes from my own relationship to the part of me that didn't know what I now know. That part of me is still here, right? So, if I ate animals and now I don't eat animals, I can, dedicate my entire life to fighting for the animals and fighting against those who are eating animals. But I am still those people, right? And if I project that part of me and I feel that oppositional energy of adversarial dialectic, right? Then I am trapped. So I can, even though I do not consent to the scientific, medical, biological reality that you are living in, I am not entering that. It is not mine. And I'm holding mine. And you can visit with it if you like. You do not have to, right? Even though that's not the level I'm willing to enter into discussion with you until and if we have reconciled with, that's why this is so interesting to me, because I don't know how we do that.
Right.
And it's certainly not through debate. I do believe I can still visit with your vulnerability, or this anonymous, vulnerable person's vulnerability, through my heart. Right. And I can be present to your experience. I can offer you what serves me to offer you, and nothing more. And that may be my compassion. It may be my listening ear. It may be, an intention to deeply understand what it is that you want me to understand. Right. But I cannot offer you behavioral change that is predicated on a violation of what it is that is true and real for me.
Right.
Thank you for that. I mean, there's some really, really key points here, which is to me fascinating, because I can hear the one side of the, let's say the pro system structure saying, well, yeah, but the harm that gets created by existing in this other reality, right? Which one could say, okay, well, yeah, that's your reality, right? That, let's say germs are not the cause and right? But they'll say, but you're transmitting the virus still, and you're creating harm and even killing people, right? Because you're not willing to go along with the story of that seems to be the collective mainstream.
And that's exactly. It's so amazing,
Oh, you cut out for 1 second, Kelly. What did you say?
Oh yeah, I don't know why that keeps happening. No, I was just saying that's the amazing thing about the mirror, is that's like, in one way, what I would exactly say about them, that they're harming people, they're spreading a virus of fear, and they're killing people, literally. So it's like, when we get into that mirror, it's very humbling to see how similar it is. And that's always how I'm brought back to, okay, that's not where the work lies, right? Like it's somewhere else. It's some other plane.
Well, then, so for me, then I guess this lands at a place where, I see where the reaction to an authority or structures of authority that have just really misused the let's call it like the sacred trust of that. Like I spoke earlier, but before this call with Samira, around, when I look to what I would call an intact cultural paradigm where there's a certain natural order, and I draw on, for example, places like Tamera in Portugal, which I've been a few times now, and researching, and they've essentially like reconstructed, a village structure, and they use not authority or hierarchy, but natural order, which is, elders that have earned the seats, right, and that carry a certain truing to life, have the capacity to orient the community, right, in meaningful ways. And so we're living, modern existence is living in the crater of the loss of those deep, interdependent webs of consequence. And so in some sense, what I see is almost like, the whole nation state, bureaucratic, military, industrial, medical complex is this, as I said, this tower that is sort of showing its finitude in a way. And so many people are sort of saying, well, look, they're stepping away from this. But in that in-between space, right, there's not really another camp. Like it's in another camp that feels, safe. But I understand why these others cluster together.
Yeah.
Right. And now they're sort of painted in this very broad view brush called the anti-vax camp. And of course, there's such vast nuance, quote, within that camp, just as there would be with pro. And a lot of people that have said yes to the system simply out of obligation or they lose their job or not. Or, a lot of people that are sort of like, were essentially coerced into it and are still willing to say yes. And so again, the simplicity, of course, is just not true in terms of both camps. But it's like, I see this danger in a kind of reorientation, right? Where now, because there's no sense of a trusted authority, that one has to orient to themselves, right? And this is what you've been speaking to, I think. And also, you have this line here saying, what is it? Something about the truth. Oh yeah. How do you know what's real and what's not? When your body gets clear, it tells you the truth. I think this is something you've used in some of the writing too. And so I understand now that impulse, right? Is to say like, whoa, this is just too much and too disembodied, which often much of modern culture is that. It seems to be just an invitation to disembodiment. And so you're saying, okay, get back clear to your body. And then I'm left now, of course, with, when one is caught in trauma cycles and trauma patterns, your body seems to be not that reliable in certain ways, right? Yeah, because, you're in fight or flight, you're in all this stuff. So I guess I'm kind of seeing this dispersion of people who are like, whoa, leaning out of the current system, but they're in a way lost, just as lost, if not more lost, outside of that system. And this is what Charles might say, the space between stories.
Yes.
And I don't know how to really answer that, but I mean, that's just sort of what I'm seeing, I guess, now from this seat and this inquiry. But yeah, I wonder what might come to you hearing on that.
Absolutely. Wow. I love the phrase you used, invitation to disembodiment. That's feels very true in my body. And, I have clinically, I guess, really come to, again, one very biased perspective, which is that there is an order of operations, right, in the reclamation process, in the adulting process, in the healing process. Although I don't prefer the word healing any longer. Actually, I like words like self-discovery or integration, where there is kind of a Maslow's hierarchy, right? And when you attend to these lower rungs of need, you can start to ascend in a more stable, graceful way. And so that's why I am of the perspective that, understanding the power of your choice through lifestyle decisions, right? Through the food that you're eating, the water you're drinking, what does your home environment look like? What products are you buying? What are you doing when you wake up? These kinds of lifestyle-based choices I have witnessed, it can confer a near magical opening into the greater dimensions of your personal power through these very secular decisions. But I believe that there we are. That has to come first, because as you're saying, if your body is riddled with all sorts of neuroinflammatory messages, and you got bloating and headache and, your hair is falling out and your knees throbbing and by the way, you're, anxious all the time, and your body is a battlefield that of course you're longing to escape from. And that's the nature of dissociative. It doesn't have to be a clinically DSM based dissociative diagnosis for all of us to relate to how it is that we fly up here when it gets uncomfortable, down here, or we just numb out and we don't have a relationship, to our own embodiment, to our own sense of like, what's actually happening in here right now? Is there a tingling somewhere? Is there a buzzing? Is there a clenching? What's going on? And these tissues, from the research I've done, they store. Candace Pert's work was really informative around that concept. They store emotional material. And so once you get, that foundational physiological platform under your feet, then you can start to look where you haven't been able to look. You're empowered to start to look at your relationship, your job, the incoherence in your life, the ways in which you are opting into ongoing struggle. And that, process can be lifelong, but the sort of like, visionary plants and, deep spiritual work and all of that, absent a truce with the body, absent a relationship to the body as a an expression of you to you about you. That's what I believe symptoms are, right? It's the soul coming through you. So when you have that illness, in my perspective, and certainly not just mine, that illness is you. It's you, actually. So there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to fight. And you're invited to learn and decode your special messaging to you, right? And once you relate to yourself that way, first of all, your body becomes less scary. And you start to see that actually, it's only in fighting with those aspects of yourself that you have been enculturated to hate and hide that you experience suffering on the outside. Then your body can start to inform what it is that, you need to do, what it is that you can think, it gives you this little hit. And it's really binary. It's like, yes, no. And it's not, it's quiet and stable, the energy of that signal. And at least for me, it's low in my body, right? My fight or flight and my trauma reactivity and triggers, it's all up here, and it's very charged, and it wants to do something quick, right? Say something, write that email, it's vectorized. That yes or no, the charge is enough to show you that it's not likely to serve anything more than the repeated patterns you've already probably seen a million times of your own victim experience. And so, yeah, the reclamation of the body as one's selfhood is far deeper than a my body, my choice agenda could ever reveal. And that's what we were alluding to in discussion of breastfeeding, what is this body? What am I doing in this body? Is it a scary thing? Is it just a bunch of bad genes that I inherited and they're just going to go off like a grenade at random moments? I mean, there's so much conditioning to undo. And you can see at the moment, you have a funny symptom, it just all hops back in there. But I do think that curiosity is such an antidote. I mean, it's probably an antidote to many fears, but certainly in this realm, and it liberates you to become your own sentient compass.
I feel as you're speaking, Kelly, you're really helping me get more clear on that question of what complementarity looks like as that ongoing inquiry, because it's one that, you're really inquiring into as well. And it seems you're also quite a bit in a role of an educator now. As someone who's passionate about yoga and the yogic understanding of the body and mind, it's a very empowering paradigm.
Yes.
Okay. One in which, as you progress in your understanding of what this mind is and what it's capable, and what the body is and what it's capable, the more sovereign you become over the reality of your own lived body-mind experience, right? And within my culture, this has been known for a long time, and it's emerging, and the science that came from that culture was very much originated in this very empowered approach of the possibility of the body and mind. And many of the scientists or Ayurvedic practitioners were established in yogic truths and practices and principles, which maybe clearly are very different from, Western medical paradigm, and even the medical tyranny that's going to other cultures and saying, well, you're completely wrong, follow this way. And there's a fallout against that. So I am empathetic towards that. And actually, I feel part of my role in educator is similarly to empower and encourage people to take more sovereignty and control over the capacity of what this is capable of, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, almost like with children, there's only a certain amount or degree of wherever they're at to which they're capable of doing that.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe at, level 1 or kindergarten level 2, like they're not able to do that. Like, they're only capable of this much. And that's where I think the compassion is, or to recognize, okay, well, this is where you're at. How do we support that? And this is where you're at. How do we support it? While always supporting to pull people up the ladder. Right? Yes. And if there is an unwillingness to say, okay, well, but this is true for you at this level, and we have to relate to you and support you at this level, because you can't just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps yet. So there has to be this almost this degree where there's this collective willingness to support people in that process of reclaiming that sovereignty or that body-mind capacity. And that's a tricky thing to do.
And I don't even think the groundwork, like I think as I would, you're already looking through the lens of this is real, right? You can experience your own power. When you're afraid, we can support you so that you can reconnect to your own power and you can do the best that you can, not to outsource that power to an authority. That's assuming that
I'm not talking about power. I'm not talking about power. I'm talking about just even on basic health choices and things that people are going to make based on their understanding and knowledge of things. And it's a step-by-step process, right?
Yeah, the worldviews having inhabited the other one, they don't mesh like that yet that I can see, right? Because one is mechanistic and materialistic. That there's no healing. I did not learn how to heal or that healing was even an option. In fact, I was trained to deride the concept. Okay. So if that is what I believe as an allopathic physician, that this concept of healing is total woo, that this concept of like you taking responsibility for your health and coming into a sacred relationship to your body as the wise guide of your process of self-discovery, that is nonsense. Literal nonsense. It's reckless and dangerous nonsense to somebody who was trained the way that I was trained and all of the people that they influence. So how is it that we can invite people into this other paradigm if it's right for them when they're ready? That's why I focused the past 5 years or so of my life on simply making sure scientifically, social media wise, blog wise, whatever, that people know what's possible. Okay. You got a diagnosis of Graves' disease. Well, guess what? I published a case report of a woman who healed it without surgery or any radioactive therapy. That is possible. And if you know that, it could ignite something in you that, yes, you might need a lot of support. You may know that, and then it'll be 15 years before you can even take one baby step in the direction of that, personal experience of truce with your own body. But the worldviews, it's hard for me to convey, again, having inhabited that worldview now in this one, how irreconcilable they are. The vitalism perspective and the materialist, I'll call it the scientism perspective, but allopathic perspective, they literally value different things. They have different metrics and variables, and they literally look at outcomes as completely different. The outcome of one is not even relevant, doesn't exist in the other, and vice versa. So how do they come together?
Okay.
Otherwise,
you don't really see complementarity as really a possibility from what I'm hearing.
I so want to, because I know it's the only way. I get stuck always in the fact that I'm really seeing it through my perspective, right? Like there's a hegemony of my worldview, and again, I have to remember, when I used to believe that, this is it's literally speaking a dialect that does, yeah. So the only way not the only way, one of the ways that I have tried to help people, I guess, if that's such a thing, support people who feel this tension. A lot of suffering arises from the tension of awareness and the inability to translate that, right? Like when you want to be ready, or you even want to be ready, but you're just not, but there's another way. So in those cases, I encourage people to, when they engage the medical system, whether that's going to a doctor or an emergency room or taking a prescription or whatever, try to get into a comportment toward it that relieves the have to, because I know that that's one of the hooks, right? Anyone who is afraid, you go into that childlike powerlessness, and of course you feel, I have to go to the doctor. I have to take this vaccine. I have to take those antibiotics. I have to go to the emergency room. You do not make contact with your sovereign power, which is choice, right? So could you possibly reframe that engagement very simply by saying, I'm choosing to do this, right? I've never brought my children to a doctor or emergency room, okay? I have a cat who's like a karmic, wow, I don't even know what this cat's about, okay? It's like a guru beyond the beyond for me. What I've been through emotionally, spiritually since adopting this cat is beyond. Okay, I have taken this cat to the emergency room 4 times so far, and I've only, been with him for about 2 years. So every time that I engage the veterinary system, because, well, don't even get me started, but he was neutered, which is its own complicated thing. So he's in the vibration now of like all the complications related to that before I adopted him. So, I could have him with his urinary occlusion, sitting out on my back porch about to die. And I could say, you know what, there's nonlinear outcomes potentially available here. How can I access those? Maybe that's just a statistic that doesn't apply to him. The way I think about humans, right? If that's not emotionally available to me, which it was not in these incidences, when I was in the parking lot of that vet ER, I knew that I, for myself, had to get to a place of saying, I am choosing this. I could choose to let him die if I think that's going to happen at home, or I could choose to approach it differently, or whatever it is. I am choosing this. I don't have to bring him to an emergency room. It's subtle, but it allowed me, even in that dimension, humbling dimension, to retain a power that I would have otherwise given away into this triangular victim experience that I'd really like to step out of in as many instances as possible for my own sense of peace, right?
Well, Kelly, really appreciating our time. Lots of subjects that, would warrant further unpacking and exploration. And we're getting, close to the completion of this conversation. And I just want to mirror what I'm left with is, just a sense of the Bill Plotkin work, if you're familiar with his stuff around, again, rites of passage, journey of the soul. He advocates that there's this time in one's life, I think the time of the West, to go deep, right? To explore into the shadow, self-discovery. Who am I? All of those times are generally, they're specific to that time of life when one is meant to do that work. That's like soul work for that time. And that on the other side of that, then there is this sort of welcoming back into, a greater cosmology. And so I see that there's, in some ways, this is the invitation that I think is being put forth by this work. And it's deeply challenging and troubling for the ways it is for many. And so again, I don't want to, I don't want to lessen the fact that it can be very agitating or fraught or fear-inducing and the rest, and at the same time feels important to be able to wander in these ways around these things, because there is a lot at stake, and this kind of conversation to me is not and just simply an intellectual exercise that in fact has many real world consequences. And the stakes are high. And so I'm grateful for the time that we've spent here. And Jameer, anything you want to ask before we close?
No, I really appreciate you're able to hold both, even though you may not see or say, maybe you didn't say complementarity as a real possibility. I think it's the willingness that creates the possibility.
I hope so. I love that.
And that's what something that I see. And, a depth psychology perspective is challenging because, for many people, because in many ways it turns the light back on ourselves to say, well, how am I creating my experience of the world? And to what degree am I creating my reality? And, how deep down the rabbit hole do you want to go? Right? And so, anyways, I leave it to you. Any last thoughts or comments you want to share?
Oh, yeah, no, I loved this conversation. I feel really inspired. Maybe even that, somebody listening or you both, like, will have this vision. I know that it's going to start to come through. And I know that it's not going to feel like a compromise. It's not going to feel like a sacrifice. It's going to feel this complementarity, if that's the word. It's going to feel like an arrival at, this destination of love that we came here to journey toward. And it's going to be incredible. And I'm sure we'll catch little glimpses of it. I think we're not ready yet. And that's why we can't see it. Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm not ready yet. I've had even experiences of my own addiction to the habit of struggle. Like I have to titrate my nervous system to peace and harmony and interdependence. I need time, to do that work before I could possibly receive the gift of that complementarity. And maybe that's why I can't see it, but I'm very excited for it to come through, how it is that we can, create an experience of human togetherness, not despite or in spite of, but through the deep understanding of self that can only emerge through the experience of the divisiveness and separateness that has been really, engendered here. So thank you so much for this conversation. It feels very important and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly.